Hello again. In this video, I'm going to talk about some preliminary material for section 2.7. And so in this video, we're going to talk about interpreting absolute values. So in this example here, we have the absolute value of x minus 1 is less than 2. And so we want to sort of interpret what this means. So on the number line, let's see if we can't figure out which x values would satisfy this inequality. Okay, so here's 1. Okay, 1 is right here on the number line. Now, would 2 satisfy this inequality if x were 2? Well, sure. If I plug a 2 in, 2 minus 1 is 1. The absolute value of 1 is 1, which is less than 2. So 2 would work. 2.9 would work as well. Okay, if x were 2.9, then 2.9 minus 1 would be 1.9. The absolute value of 1.9 is 1.9, and that's less than 2. But once you get to 3, x equal to 3 would no longer satisfy this inequality, because when you plug a 3 into here, you get 2. The absolute value of 2 is 2, and that's no longer less than 2 because it's equal to 2. And so it looks like all these values in here would work. So I'm going to shade these in all the way up until you get to this point right here. And I'm going to keep that as an open circle, indicating that it does not work right at x equals 3. But any number right up until 3, like 2.999, would work. Okay. All right, what about some of the x values on this side of 1? Well, 0 would work. 0 minus 1 is negative 1. And then you take the absolute value of negative 1 and you get 1, and that is less than 2. So it looks like all these numbers in here would work, including 0. And then you can continue to plug in numbers in here, but right when you get to negative 1, it's no longer going to work. Because when you plug negative 1 in for x, you get negative 2. The absolute value of negative 2 is positive 2. And again, that's not less than 2. So negative 1 does not work. So the answer would be all the numbers between negative 1 and 3. So x can be strictly between negative 1 and 3, and it will satisfy this inequality. Now, one way of interpreting this is to say that 1 is the center of this interval, and that's coming from here, and it has a tolerance of 2, so you can go plus or minus 2 from that center. So 1 plus 2 would push you up to the upper end of this interval at 3, and then 1 minus 2 would push you down to the low end of this interval, negative 1. So you can think of this as it's centered at 1, and it has a tolerance of 2. So 1 plus or minus 2, and that will give you this interval. So there's various ways of interpreting this absolute value. Okay, so one interpretation would be in interval notation, x is trapped between negative 1 and 3. In terms of a tolerance, it's centered at 1 with a tolerance of 2. So this is your tolerance. And this is the center. Okay, and another interpretation is to think of it as the distance. You could also think of this as the distance between x and 1 must be less than 2. So whatever x value you pick, the distance between that x value and 1 must be less than 2 in order for it to satisfy this inequality. So for example, 2.9, if x was 2.9, the distance between 2.9 and 1 is 1.9, and that is less than 2. So that's another interpretation. Okay, so the distance between this number and this number would have to be less than this number. Now, when we get to section 2.7, we're also going to see absolute values written like this, where we have f of x inside of here. But the same sort of interpretations hold. Okay, so if you want f of x minus the absolute value of f of x minus 1 to be less than 2, then that means f of x would have to be trapped between minus 1 and 3, just like it would here. And you can also think of this as being centered at 1 with a tolerance of 2, and that's how you can get this interval. But in this case, f of x is trapped between these two numbers and not x. And of course, the other interpretation would be that the distance between f of x and 1 has to be less than this number 2. But again, in this case, it's the distance between f of x and 1, not x and 1. Okay, so I want you to keep this in mind as we work through section 2.7. I think it's important that you understand each of these different interpretations of the absolute value symbol. Okay, so I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.